everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Trailblazer Talks with Fuchsia. I am excited to have you all join us today. And for those of us who are new here, Trailblazer Talks is a series dedicated to helping Salesforce professionals or people who are entering into their Salesforce careers to navigate their careers by listening to experts' opinions, gaining some knowledge, and general valuable insights, which will help you in moving forward in your career. With this series, our goal is to empower you and to help you thrive in Salesforce ecosystem. So, with that said, today we have an incredible guest with us, Safia. Safia is a Salesforce consultant and a marketing champion and London product group leader. Welcome, Safia. Thank you. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm really well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It was really nice of you to reach out.
Mhm. Would you like to share anything else about yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. So a bit of an intro to me. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since around 2016, I think it was. Kind of similar use story to what other people say as well, in terms of just coming across Salesforce in my day job, being really inquisitive, ultimately ended up managing about 9 Pardot instances by the time I left that role. So it was very hands-on. It was very much learning as you go. And I was lucky enough to have a manager there who kind of encouraged me to do some certifications and find out more. That's how I got involved in the user groups. I then became a consultant a couple of years afterwards, and I've been a consultant ever since. So more and more focused on the nonprofit sector. I'm currently working at Give Clarity, and we specialize exclusively with nonprofits. So that's kind of my happy place at the moment. I've been working with nonprofits for the last 4 or 5 years and implementing both core and marketing automation solutions.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Looks like you've had a really interesting journey so far.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been kind of an unusual path, but I think all along I've just kind of picked what I enjoyed and been quite curious. So who knows what's ahead.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive into our discussion today, I would love to know where everyone is joining us from. So please drop your location in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. Also, it's always wonderful to see a diverse group tuning in from around the world. So please share in your location where you're joining us from. Um, and so today's topic, it's a really interesting topic for many of us here because within Salesforce ecosystem, especially when you're working with a consultancy, you need to work on several different client projects. You need to make sure you are keeping yourself updated with certifications and networking with fellow trailblazers, attending community events and making your presence felt and whatnot, and keeping up with all the new releases that's happening because it's a very fast moving world. So sometimes it all gets way too overwhelming. So today, Safia will share some amazing insights, like how she is, uh, just taking care of all this. She actually wrote a wonderful blog on this topic with Salesforce Ben. So if you want to read that, I will put the link in our comment section as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So yeah, it's really amazing to have you with us today. But I just want to kick things off with just identifying, like, what are the main observations or main sources of stress Salesforce professionals have? Because if you're not able to identify like what problems you're facing, you'll never be able to find a solution for those. So I just want to start our conversation with identifying, like, in your experience so far, what observations you have made specifically related to Salesforce professionals. Like, what are the main sources of stress for people who are working with consultancies?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a few of the important ones there, and Just a bit of context on the blog. It started off really as an idea, I think, from my own experience and from speaking to others around the sorts of things that people had faced. Things like burnout are fairly common in the consulting world, not just for Salesforce professionals, but kind of in general, because of a lot of the things that you've mentioned. So I was really curious about, mental health and mental well-being in the Salesforce community. And the reason why I kind of wrote the article and ran a survey was because I was presenting at London's Calling, which is a great event. If you can get along to that, if you're in London or passing through, please do check it out. So I was presenting at London's Calling, and I wanted to talk about mental health among Salesforce professionals, but I wanted to frame it in the context of getting more information from others. So I ran a survey. That survey ran for about a month. In the months prior to it, collected loads of feedback, some really insightful thoughts shared by people. I did a bit of analysis on the sorts of things that people were facing in terms of the challenges. And then the talk itself was kind of presenting back the findings, proposing some solutions. And the blog is a really good summary of that as well. So it pulls through a lot of the key findings in a follow up article as well. So if you check out on Salesforce Ben, you can see the introduction to the survey launching and also the follow up and the responses. So the key themes that we saw really were around overworking, managing priorities, not really knowing how to say no, I think is quite a common one. When you're a consultant, you're maybe caught between your the company that you work for, also the client. So you've maybe got these things coming at you from two angles, and that can add to some of those burdens. It can be a high pressure environment, but I think what the nice thing was that we saw at the output of the surveys, it doesn't have to be, and there is a shift happening. There are a lot of organizations are mindful of this now, particularly after the pandemic. And I think that the workload and the competing priorities really are the main sources of stress that we saw coming out of the survey, that especially for consultants. For those who maybe are freelancing, it can be an added pressure of maybe not knowing where your work's going to be coming from and the uncertainty that comes with it as well. So there was a slightly different angle for freelance consultants versus those that are working, as part of a consultancy. And then, of course, in-house, there could be other challenges there. So again, you might have a fast pace, you might have responsibility towards other people, but then you might also be maybe perhaps more limited in the resource available to you. You might not be getting as much support or exposure to the rest of the ecosystem that those in consulting may get. Very mixed bag. I'm sorry, it's not a very specific answer, but there are quite a lot of different paths there, and I think you picked up on some important ones about the workload and the competing priorities there.
No, actually, so I completely agree with you on this because there are so many different paths. People who are working as freelancers, for them, the pressure is very different for
Mm,
rather than people who are working in consultancies. So I completely agree with you on that. But there are some things which are common for everyone, I believe. So, for example, keeping yourself up to date with all the latest releases, something which everyone has to do, and sometimes it just gets extremely overwhelming because it's like a 450 pages long document which you're thinking about, okay, how can I go through all of it to be able to understand or make some sense of the new features which are which they're releasing now. So a few things are common for everyone, but then there are different pain points for different categories, I'll say. I want to shed some more light on the thing which you shared for consultants, because for people who are working in consultancies, a lot of the time saying no becomes a very big issue. So how can they
mm,
set up some boundaries and work through the situation where you don't want to feel like, okay, you don't want to do anything because you're too lazy, because you don't want to fall into that category either. But then you also have to understand that you also have to live a personal life, because you can't keep on going like this if you are not saying no at a certain point of time. So the biggest challenge is, and this is a two-part question which I want to ask. The first thing is, how can you say no politely without being judged for it? And then the second thing is, how can you decide that this is enough and now I have to say no?
Hmm. Okay, good point. So I'll address the first question first. The first thing I'm going to say is you're always going to be judged, right? People are always going to have their own opinions. People are always going to think what they're going to think, and we have no control over that. So the first thing I would say is you kind of need to like let go of the fear that people are going to think X, Y, and Z. You have no control over it, and understanding what you have control over and what you don't is a really good first step in terms of understanding your well-being. Because you know ultimately all you can control is your own actions, and how people respond to that is out of your control. That being said, you can do things in better ways and worse ways. So just outright saying, no, I'm not going to do it, that's not helpful to people. It can be hurtful. It can damage somebody else's own kind of responsibilities and priorities. So how you do things is very important. And that's the bit I'll address second. I think just I wanted to clarify you can't spend too much time overthinking it and worrying about it, but being mindful and considerate is very important. So I think in terms of kind of how to communicate that, the fact that you're even communicating and thinking about how to communicate it is a really good first step, right? There's no point having a boundary if nobody knows about it, because ultimately then it comes into the second point and it just to them will sound like you're just saying an outright no. So there are a couple of ways I like to do this. For the first one, in terms of just managing my time, in terms of like these are the hours I'm going to work and this is when I'm going to shut down and get on with my personal life, I like to use my calendar. So I everything is in my calendar. I live and breathe it. I've got the start of my day is clearly marked. The end of my day is clearly marked. I'm fortunate enough to work somewhere where we do have flexible working policies, so that may change day to day ahead. So beginning of my week, I always have a little block for time management. I review that. There might be some days I'm happy to work later, some days I'm going to start earlier. And I try and make sure that that's as clear as possible in my calendar. If it's going to affect other people in your team, communicate that with them. So, if you need to leave for a medical appointment a couple of hours early, tell that to the colleagues that are going to be affected and make sure it's very clear to them. Try and communicate that in advance as much as you can as well. So the more notice they have, the more you can plan around. Just keep that communication open. If it is something that you're flexible on, make that clear. Say, look, I've got this thing that's going on at 6 o'clock this evening. If we're really working to the wire and you need me, I can be available. And just keeping that communication open, transparent, and giving people enough time is a really good way to set it. That's kind of a general practice, but when it comes to actual specific boundaries, I like to make sure that it's conditioned like as an if statement, right? If you need me to get something done by tomorrow morning, I'm going to need it in my inbox by 2 o'clock today, so I have enough time to look at it. I think that's quite clear. So saying I need this by 2 o'clock so that I can do X, Y, and Z. If you're going to send it to me later than 2 p.m., I'm sorry, I won't be able to do it today. Then let them know when you can and communicate that as well. I'm sorry, I won't be able to do that today, but I'll look at it first thing tomorrow. And again, just making sure people have options. They might say to you, oh, that's fine. I'm not going to be able to do it by 2 o'clock, so I'm happy for you to look at it first thing tomorrow. Or they could be like, right, now I need to make sure I get it to this person by 2 o'clock. They've made it very clear what I need to get done. So thinking about it in that way and being mindful of how you frame it to the other person, ultimately it is going to affect their work as well. You want to be collaborative. It's not just putting a wall up and saying, okay, this is my wall, like don't cross it. It's a communication thing, right? Saying, if we need to achieve this, this is what we can do together. Setting that boundary, I think, can be collaborative if you're doing it well in advance. But when you start to do things later on and you're in that heightened state of mind and you're panicked or you've got a deadline yourself, it becomes more and more difficult to have that communication. So laying the groundwork early becomes really important.
Yeah, completely agree with you on all the points you've shared. But something, which I want to talk about is setting up that time management block. So a lot of time
Mm.
people, I guess, miss this very crucial point. So you just start your day or your week without any planning, and it just creates a chaos because then you are
Yes.
procrastinating a lot of time, like, okay, this is something I need to do, this is something I need to do, but you're still not clear on what you will be achieving throughout that day. So this is
Mm.
a very good point. And for this, like, my tip is to maybe, just add this block in your calendar for every week, maybe on Friday evening, so that you can plan your next week in advance, or maybe on Monday morning and see like how you're going to work throughout the week. So that might make you, not might, that will actually make you super productive. Anything you want to add, like how people can manage their time in a better way, because this is the first point of analyzing how much work you have and what you can complete within your given time frame.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in a work setting that, being overworked or having too much on your workload can be kind of mitigated a bit by managing your time and being able to communicate that to other people then when they want to support you. So yeah, I do it every Monday morning. That's kind of when I like starting the day. It gives me a bit of time to kind of get back into work, check my emails, and then I go in and manage my time. I block out my calendar. So I quite like using calendar blocks, not just for meetings, but also for when I want to get work done, because this is a mantra I use in my personal life as well as work. But, I can be free but not available. And I like this, right? Because if you are somebody who's in a lot of meetings, consultants tend to be, it might look like you've got free time, but that's not really free time. It's not time that you're available. It's time you have free in your calendar because you need to go and get your work done. So I quite like just blocking it out of my calendar. I color code it. I can look at a glance. I can go, okay, right, this is a meeting with a different person. This is a time block just for me to get X, Y, and Z tasks done. So I find using the calendar that way really helpful. Some other tools that I like are the Pomodoro method. So I can send you a link in the chat later on. But there's a really nice web tool called pomofocus.io, and it's a tool which allows you to apply the Pomodoro method where you work for 25 minutes and then you have a 5-minute break. That gives me time to kind of reset and go, okay, I've completed this task, check off, make sure I've done everything, and then start the next one. So you're not bouncing from one task to another. Um, Sometimes you might want to stretch your legs, get a cup of tea, whatever, but it also includes a feature where you can add in tasks and plan your day based on how many essentially Pomodoro blocks your task will take. So if I think something is going to take me an hour, then I would give myself 2 of those Pomodoro blocks to work on it. If it's going to take me 3 or 4, so on, you adjust it, and then it helps you work through the day. So that could be quite a nice tool to use. There are so many of these things out there, so it's just a case of finding one that you like. I really like the way this one looks. I like the little buzzer in my ear when the timer goes off. I think finding what works for you and then building that into your routine is really the important thing.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good tool and interesting thing to have as well, because a lot of time, we're just working on a task. We just keep on going and going and going without actually
Mm,
looking at a clock, like what's happening. And maybe sometimes towards the end of the day, if you feel like, okay, we were not able to do anything else other than these two tasks because it took so long to complete the first one, and now we're stuck. So it's a really good idea to actually assess like how much time we need
mm.
at the beginning, and then we can adjust our day accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. And things might take longer or less time than you anticipate as well. So it just gives you that moment to reflect and think back, right? You could start a task and go, oh, I'm sure I can get this done in 20 minutes. And then you get stuck into it and it takes you half a day.
Mhm.
Being able to kind of revisit that and then readjust your plan based on it is important as well. Because if that's now taking you half a day, other things will have to be deprioritized. So I think, again, that time management, as you mentioned, maybe like building that into your day really helps.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. And the second thing we discussed was politely saying no. And
Yes.
I really like when you mentioned, hey, if you want me to do something by today, end of the day, um, I need this in my inbox by 2 p.m. Because when you're saying this, the second part of this as well, like if you can't send it to me by 2 p.m., I'll not be able to do this by the end of the day. When you're
Hmm.
setting boundaries in this way, you're actually letting the other person know, like, okay, this is something is necessary, and like it's not like you can just whip up something out of nowhere within like few seconds. So it's a really good way
Yeah.
to approach people. Is there anything else you would like to add in here, like any other ways you've found where with which you can just set boundaries without being too uncooperative person, I'll say.
Yeah, no, uncooperative is a good word. I think really it's clear communication and doing it in a timely manner that I think reduces the risk of somebody feeling like you're just saying no out of difficulty. I think if you leave it too late, if you're telling this person at 5 o'clock, so I can't do it now because you didn't send it to me by 2 p.m., that is
Mhm.
not helpful because they didn't know that information up front. So you need to be mindful of when you're communicating as well as how you're doing it. I
Mhm.
think when you're working with a team, you do want to be collaborative, you do want to cooperate whilst maintaining your boundaries. So I think making sure that you communicate ahead of time is really important so that when it gets to saying no, it's not just an outright no, it's a no because, and you're giving them a reason why and then a potential solution. So if I use that example, if I say, and I should say, I learned this the hard way, right? I worked in marketing, I worked in email marketing, and very often we would have content sent to us by a client. We would then put that content together in an email and then be sending out. Now, some clients would understand that you need to send the content in good time. There's a review process. That process needs to get tested, and then you can send out the email. Other clients were less aware or under different deadlines. So we had to build in these processes. We had to say when you submit the request, that email is not going to go out the same day. It's going to be the next day or later. So you work backwards. And this is where the time management actually helps you because then you have a clear idea of if I need to do this task, this is what the process looks like. You work backwards from what needs to get done. So if you think of that example, let's say I want to send out an email at the end of the day and my client sends it to me at 2 p.m. content, I can say, if you send me the content by 2 p.m., I can get your email out by the end of the day, not a problem. If not, this is when the next one's going to happen. If the client knows this ahead of time, then it shouldn't get to the point where I'm just saying an outright no. They should already know that it's unlikely. So if they're sending it to me now at 3 or 4 o'clock and they're saying, "Can you send this out?" I'm not saying just straight up, "No, I'm not doing it." I'm saying no because we already agreed that it had to be sent out by 2 p.m. and then give them an option as well. So say, right, we've not been able to send it out today. As we already agreed, I'm happy to look at it first thing tomorrow morning. So basically, what
Mhm.
you're doing is you're communicating, you're warning people, you're collaborating. You can form that agreement together. And then if something goes wrong, you've got that to fall back on. And it helps everybody because they're clear on what the expectation was. You're already clear on what was agreed. And then you can make sure that you're aligned together. So what I'm trying to say is that you really shouldn't get to a situation where it is just a blanket no. And as much as possible, try and refer back to what was already agreed. If nothing was agreed previously, make sure you explain the reasons why you're saying no and give somebody an alternative solution. So yeah, there will be scenarios where, I don't know, somebody rings you up and it's 5:30 and you've got to go and walk your dog or something, and now they're ringing you up and they're saying, "Can you jump on a call?" Maybe I shouldn't use the walk the dog example. The dog could maybe wait a few minutes. But, let's say you're picking up your kids from school, for example. Then it's very clear, right? You can say, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do this right now because this is the prior commitment I've got, but here's the next time I can ring you, whether that's the next day or later on. It's up to you." So I would always frame a no with a reason and then an alternative if you can.
Yeah, completely agree with you on this. You have to set your boundaries beforehand because you need to agree on something. Then only you
Mm.
can later on say that, okay, this is something we discussed earlier and this is how the process works. So we need to wait for this much time. So I would really appreciate that, if you can send it to me by so and so time, we can get it done by our deadline. And so that's a more polite and a professional way to actually set boundaries rather than simply saying, no, I can't do that. Now you're giving
Mm.
them a reason like why it's not possible, because there's no point of, you putting everything aside, even if you'll and this is something which I have also realized the hard way. Once you'll accept the work after that 5:30 mark, um, and you start doing things later in the day as well using your own personal time, people
Mm.
will be more like, okay, yeah, we can get some more work done as well. So hey, yeah, you'll start getting those requests very so often. So make sure that people are aware that okay, this is a deadline which they need to respect. And if don't get into this habit of getting the work done after the office hours. Try to wrap everything up within your office hours, and that's a good practice, not just for like getting the work done, but also making sure that you have enough time to relax, reset, and that's how you can work in a much more energized way the next day as well.
Yeah, it's really important. That rest period is important, not just for you, but also for, I think, for the organization that you're working for. So it's in an employer's interest to make sure that their employees are well rested because mistakes happen when you're burnt out. And, you don't
Yes.
want to get to the point where people are burnt out. Taking that rest, taking that break is super important for many reasons, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. But yeah, just even from an employer perspective or from a manager perspective, making sure that your team has that break and that reset is so important as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on this. Because it's not just for employees' good, but also for the business good. Because if they are
Mm.
feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling burnt out, then their productivity will go down, as well as like they might not even feel like going to the office at some point of time. Because if it keeps on happening consistently, then it's just so overwhelming for them to deal with. So.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right. So I actually was thinking that we'll move on to audience questions later, but we got a question on promo focus. So promo focus. So I thought maybe we can cover this up. Ruhi wants to know. I'd like to add one more question. This Pomodoro block needs awareness for that also. So how can I be aware of it all the time if there is so much work to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I first heard about this Pomodoro method when I was at university, and back then I would set a timer on my phone and I would just like press the button to start the timer. And I found actually setting up the timer and pressing the buttons was kind of distracting. So I found this, I use this online version now. It's pinned
Mhm.
on Chrome. It always opens as soon as I start my workday. I don't use it every day, but most. And it's called, yeah, pomofocus.io. I've put the link in the chat there. Maybe we can share it with you later. This one, it, it's not a product. I think somebody just designed it for fun. But it basically automatically runs through the timer and you literally just click start, stop, and it rings a buzzer in your audio so you can hear it as well. I use that one. So it just runs through automatically and it plays through all of them. There are loads of tools out there like that. So if you search Pomodoro method tools, I'm sure you can find one. There are apps now. There's this online one which I like. So there is an awareness to a degree because you're going to get like a ringer or a reminder to let you know that this block is finished. And then there's always a break in between. So you can set like a 5 or 10 minute break in between each block of work. Now, that's intentional. It wants you to be aware of it because you want to stop and take stock and go, okay, people approach it differently. So when I was revising for uni, I would like actually like go and stand downstairs for a little bit and chat to my housemate or mix it up, like go and do a different task and then come back. Um, you can use that time to reset your mind because when you're working on a task, it can be really hard to maintain focus for really long periods of time. Different people will say different amounts. I'm not a scientist, I don't know the facts on this one, but I definitely find my interest starts to drop probably around about the 50-minute, hour and a half mark, somewhere between that, depending on what I'm talking about. So when I'm working on a task, I find it quite refreshing to just go, okay, I'm going to take a step back now, get my head out for a second, and then I'm going to come back to it. Got a new glass of water, gone and checked on my cat or whatever, and now I'm like refreshed again. So yeah, two parts. One, yes, it's mindful. You're mindful of it that the bell is going to be ringing. There are apps which can help you streamline that process, but also you kind of want to check in and be aware for that 5 minute break and go, where am I at? What am I doing next? Have I completed my task?
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, and I think I will be trying this out starting this week, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a
um,
good one.
all right, that's actually super helpful. Now, I would like to move on to something which we discussed initially. So, especially within the Salesforce ecosystem, there's a constant need for upskilling, for keeping up
Mm.
with the new releases, getting those trails done and those super badges and certifications. So, how can professionals balance their learning needs with their existing workload without feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, it's such a good point. So the first thing I would just say is like don't compare yourself to other people too much. I know it's extremely tempting to be like, oh, my colleague's done 7 super badges this month and I've only done 2 trail mixes. Like it doesn't help to compare, especially doesn't help your mental health to be comparing to other people. Work at your own pace, work with what works for you, and just be mindful of that. It's nice to get inspiration, but you don't want to be beating yourself up by comparing yourself. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. There is so much out there, and there's constant noise. You know, we're always celebrating each other's achievements, which I think is brilliant. Keep it at that celebration. Don't try and get bogged down by comparing yourself and shaming yourself, comparing to other people. So that's how I would start with. Um, in terms of like balancing it with your work, I think it varies depending on where you're working. So again, I'm quite fortunate in that where I work, we get training allowance and time to do that. So I tend to factor in new certs or new training opportunities into the time I have available at work. And I appreciate that's not available for everybody. So if it's starting to go into your personal time, then this is where that advice kind of comes in from what I'm going to give you. So I would say there is too much for everybody to know everything. I think that's a given now with Salesforce. You're not going to know everything, and it's okay. So choose what you enjoy. That's kind of been my kind of guide throughout my career is just pick what you enjoy because if you don't enjoy it, it's going to get miserable very quickly. So if you really, really like writing formulas, go ahead and do that. Go and learn how to do that really well. And you'll find that it will probably seep into the other things that you go and learn about as well. Um, I like this idea that like everything you learn helps you learn other things. So don't be put off by thinking, oh, I've only gone and learn about, I don't know, I've only gone and learn about Pardot, so I'm never going to be able to learn NPSP. That's not true. The things you learn about Pardot, the way you learn, is going to make you approach how you learn about a different part of Salesforce in a unique way. So my approach to this is like pick the things you like, pick the things you think you might be good at as well, and then just be mindful of the fact that you learning that doesn't mean that you're necessarily not going to be able to learn other things. It just means you're going to learn those other things differently. In terms of managing your time, I would kind of almost treat it like a mini project. So, in the same way you would approach a project at work, decide how much time you want to spend on it, how long you think it's going to take, when you're going to do it, and then try and stick to that routine because it can snowball, right? Like many of us probably have the Trailhead app on our mobiles. You could be doing it all day, every day. You'd probably get addicted. It is gamified. I think I could get addicted to badges if I wasn't careful. So just be aware of how much time you want to spend and treat it like a project in that way to say, okay, I want to get, I don't know, the Sales Cloud Consultant certification. I would like to get it in the next 6 months. So I'm going to set aside 2 hours every week to go and learn that in my own time. Like set that up at the beginning and then try and build that into your routine. At the same time, don't become overwhelmed. You know, if you are learning, could be fun. Keep it fun, keep it light, keep doing what you enjoy. And if you find that you're getting to the point where it's becoming overwhelming or overbearing, then stop and take stock and kind of review whether or not it's working for you. Um, the final thing I would say is, especially for certifications, have a look to see if other people are studying what you're interested in too, and maybe find a buddy. So a lot of the user groups will do things like buddy systems where we'll ask and we'll say, is anybody studying for this cert? And if somebody says, I don't know, they're studying for the part, try and find somebody else who said they're studying for the product specialist. And I'll be like, go and talk to each other, like share your resources, have coffee, whatever, and find somebody that can kind of connect with you on that level. I think the Salesforce ecosystem is really unique in that you can definitely find somebody who's studying for the same cert. They might not be in your time zone, they might not work at your company, but you could probably find them and you can connect in that way. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity, particularly for the Salesforce professionals out there to be able to say, I'm studying for this cert. Would you like to study with me? Let's connect.
Yeah, you have shared some really amazing points. Um, Specifically the third one, finding a study buddy is really amazing, because a lot of time, just reading through the content, it gets monotonous, and you feel like you're not able to concentrate on things. And so having a study buddy and studying for the
Yeah.
certs together actually makes a huge difference. That's how I passed my admin cert, because I was actually delaying the exam for. So I started thinking about maybe passing the admin cert in 2021, and then I kept on dealing it as like, okay, I need some more time. And then eventually I found a study buddy in November of that year. And then I was able to work on the cert, and I passed in February 2022. So it took me almost more than a year, I'll say, to actually pass the cert, because I was just trying to do everything on my own. But when I found my study buddy, I was able to, do things in a much better way. So I completely agree with what you shared. And I think I will also be using that in our future community meetings, because so far I don't do this, but I think it's a super cool practice. So we can maybe club together people who are working on the same certs, and they can just use each other's support and help and expertise to um, just work on the cert. So that's a super helpful tip. And
Yeah, I think
something,
it doesn't. Sorry.
sorry, no,
No, I was
please
gonna
go ahead.
say it doesn't have to be super formal either. It can, like, for
Mhm.
me, the user group, it is genuinely just I have a chat with somebody, and then 5 minutes later I've had a chat with somebody else and they both mentioned it. So I grab one person and I bring them to the other person. I'm like, you two talk. Like, sometimes it is that informal. And I think I've also studied alongside other people for certs, and I really like the accountability of it. So what the way I tend to structure it is we break up the exam into, you have whatever the curriculum is, you do a topic, and then at the end of the day or at the end of the week, you meet up and you test each other on questions. I
Mhm.
quite like the rapport that you can build with somebody doing that. It makes it a bit more interesting than just clicking through on a screen by yourself. And
True.
like, even if you're not in the same room together, you can do it like remote. And I think it just gives you somebody to support you. And when things go wrong, you've maybe failed the exam or you get a question wrong, you can kind of learn together and support each other as well, which is important.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And for those who are not able to find any study buddy within your groups, you can find them probably on Trailhead communities, because
Yes.
in the Trailhead community answer groups or your feed, you can notice like a lot of people post about, okay, is anyone else studying for this certification? So you can just ping them and reach out to them, and whatnot. So there's a whole lot of things you can do on Trailhead as well, apart from just going through the trails and stuff. So if anyone's interested in finding a study buddy, you now know how you can do that. Uh, and another thing which I want to touch upon is, you mentioned like how because Trailhead is gamified and you get points after doing these trails, you get super addicted to it. And there was a
Mhm.
time last year where I got super addicted to Trailhead, and I was like, keep on doing new super badges and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, I'm earning so many points. So it just makes you feel so good, like you're achieving something in a way. So if you're one of those people, maybe you can actually find a way with which you're doing things at a constant pace, rather than being overwhelmed at one point of time. So this is something which I actually recently started doing with my team. So we actually have launched a 100-day Salesforce trailhead program, where you have to do one badge per day. So, and one badge generally takes around 5 to 10 minutes, or maximum 15 minutes of your time. And so, if you're doing that every day for 100 days, the idea behind this is that you become you actually acquire this habit of doing this upskilling every day for 15 minutes. So that's how you're not spending like 4 or 5 hours of your weekend on Trailhead, upskilling yourself, but rather than that, you're using those 15 minutes every day to upskill throughout the week, which is kind of super helpful for a lot of people. That's what I got so far. Um, and so this is one way with which you can do that as well. And just you can find ideas out of nowhere. It's just one of the ideas which we're using, something else might work for you. So it's just that you have to find like what works for you in the best possible way.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And I like the idea of like, building in things to your routine and making them the norm rather than waiting. You touched about the release notes before. Yes, it's a huge, huge document that you might feel very overwhelmed reading it. But there are lots of places where people write release notes. So at user groups, people quite often do release note presentations. Salesforce Spend does release notes. And that can be a nice way, again, build that into your routine. Okay, a release is coming up. I'm going to subscribe to these blogs, or I'm going to make sure I go to these particular user groups. Building that into your routine in a more digestible way can be a lot easier to unpack and more fun to do rather than just being like, I've got to read 600 pages this weekend. Like, that's very difficult for anyone to do, and it's an unreasonable ask, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on this as well. And something which I want to add about release notes is, and what works for me is, Salesforce organizes so many events to talk about these different release
Yes.
notes, depending on the product, depending on the tracks. So I try to attend like some of those, and by attending those events, you also get the opportunity to actually connect or get your questions answered by the product owners as well. So in a way, it's
Mm.
way better than you reading that 300-400 page document. Then just connecting with the person who's responsible for these changes directly and get your questions answered as well. So it works well for me. Instead of reading that, I quite enjoy watching the demos and getting more information on what's to come and what's where, and just watching everything live instead of just reading about it.
Yeah, me too. I really like the community aspect of it. So we have people tend to come and present and do release notes at the user group, particularly for Pardot or account engagement. And I really like the community aspect of it because when you've got people in a room together or in a webinar watching things together, somebody else is going to ask a question you might not have thought of, or they're going to have an idea that you've not thought of. So there's that real opportunity to connect and collaborate, which I think not only helps you from a technical perspective, but also helps from your sort of your mental well-being because you realize you're not just on your own. It's not this huge overwhelming beast of knowledge that you've got to unpack. It's actually something quite fun and exciting, and you're in it together with other people. So that community aspect that you've mentioned, I think, is hugely important.
Completely agree with you on this. Well, you've made some excellent points, and I just want to, ask one last question before we move on to our audience questions. Um, so, what advice would you give to Salesforce professionals to maintain their mental health and ensure, they have a long-term career sustainability in such a demanding field?
Yeah, so I think I've maybe mentioned some of these before, but I'll recap because I think they're good to remember as mantras, really. Firstly, is like do what you enjoy, right? There is so much out there. There's so much choice. You're not going to be able to do it all, and that's okay. So do what you enjoy. That will really help you, and it will actually, I think, empower you to make decisions about what works well for you. I can understand, sometimes when you're at consultancy, there will be pressures to learn particular things. That's okay. That's a given. It's part of the job. But as far as you can, choose what you enjoy, and I think generally that ends up being what you're good at. Um, explore lots of options. So it's really nice having spaces like this where people can share what works for them, what doesn't work, what resources they like. Ask your colleagues because ultimately they're probably in it together with you and they might have ideas that can help. um, Finding those options and exploring them, being open to them is really helpful. So, I've been burnt out at work. I've not known what to do, and speaking to my colleagues and asking them for help is what actually helps me as well. So it's really nice to be able to offer that support back and say, oh, have you read this blog? Or have you tried this app or have you been to this event? So try everything, find what works for you. Not everything's going to work for you. Like for me personally, I've tried journaling. I can never get into the habit of it. It doesn't work for me, but I've got friends who absolutely love it. So again, don't force yourself, don't give yourself that pressure to be like, oh, I must write journal every day. If it doesn't work for you, don't push yourself to do something that's uncomfortable. Um, do what works, find what you enjoy. For me personally, I love crafting. You can maybe see it, some craft stuff at the back, but setting aside the time to do that and actually pausing in a way that is meaningful to me allows me to actually like rest and reset is so important. I think that's relevant for any career. Um, I think the final one I would say is that free but not available. It kind of ties into both your workday and also in the evenings as well to say I might be free, but this is free time for me to do what I need to do. I'm not necessarily available to other people. So this is kind of a personal one for me. I would describe myself as quite extroverted and sociable. I love meeting up with friends. I love having people around. I love meeting colleagues and doing events. But I realized that actually, if I do that all the time, I'll get burnt out. Um, as much as I enjoy it, it does take a lot of energy to do, and making sure I find the time where I am free but not available gives me the time to actually like get my head down in a task and really focus or go and do that thing that I want to do, like craft something or go to the cinema. So that for me is the huge one, is just making sure I have time both in my work day and outside of work where I am free but not available to then choose what I need to do to get the day done. So yeah, that was probably the one I learnt the hard way through getting burnt out. But as much as you can preempt that stuff and plan, we've talked about time management, doing what you enjoy. I think all of those things really are small steps that you can take that will incrementally grow as you learn more about what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with the points you have shared. And there are some really good things because a lot of time we tend to copy people. Like, okay, they're doing this, I should do this as well because you're
Mhm.
feeling left out. And something which is working for your friend might not work for you, so you have to actually pick and choose, like, okay, this is something which works for me and this doesn't. So that's a really
Yeah.
good point. And using your free time to do something which you really enjoy is something which actually will give you so much positivity and good energy to deal with all these aspects of your professional life actually.
Yeah, it's so important. I was actually like a few hours before this, I was watching a video where the mayor of London was talking about a very similar topic, and he was talking about how during the pandemic he was unable to do certain things that he enjoyed. So, his name's Sadiq Khan. He was talking about playing football, seeing his friends, going to gigs, doing that sort of stuff. And he hadn't realized the impact that had on his mental well-being at work. And I really resonated with me because it's not just what you do at work that's going to affect how you feel. It's also that rest time that's super important. So I know that if, for example, if we've had a user group that week, we usually have them on a Tuesday. What I will do is I don't have my diary here, but I will actually draw a line through Monday on my diary to go, you're not making any plans. So the day before, you rest. You're energized then because Tuesday is going to be a long day. You've got your whole work day and then you've got the user group in the evening. You want to give it 100%. Or if for some reason I've got an event on the Monday, I will draw a line through Wednesday. That is my day where I'm going to rest. I'm going to do my hobbies, see my friends, relax with my cat and my husband and watch a film. Do the stuff, the downtime stuff that's really important, as well as scheduling in the meetings and the work stuff too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on this. And thank you for sharing all of these amazing insights with everyone. I would like to open the floor for some audience questions. And the first question I got from Navya in the chat is for people. I will just post it here because she sent like I get a lot of questions in the chat as well for people who feel like they can't share it on a public platform. So
Mm.
So Navya wants to know, for the people who are in leadership roles and also dealing with lots of tasks and implementation and learning, how do we feel? How do we deal with it when we're overwhelmed? And she also sent me a line, which I can't display here because of the character limits. So she wants to add on to that, like it's almost, it looks like that we need to be available for everyone at all times.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I think people in leadership roles sometimes are caught in between because you're managing a team perhaps, or you've got people that are looking up to you, and then also you're responding to those who are more senior to you as well. It is difficult. I think it is important in a way to set a good example for other people, so that can kind of come at a cost as well, right? Sometimes you can feel more pressure because you have to set an example. I appreciate that. But I think communicating it to, your own manager or to your own support, maybe HR if that's appropriate, to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Please can you help me prioritize? Can you tell me what's more important? Where do I need to focus? Getting that soundboard to kind of check things with can be really helpful. There will be some leaders who don't have that soundboard. If you're working at a small organization, if you're the CEO and there's nobody else that you can speak to, if there isn't a HR, maybe think about coaching, see if there's somebody outside of that system who can speak to you and kind of untangle what you're going through. Quite often we've got the solutions in ourselves, but we just need somebody to kind of like tease it out and ask the right questions. So I found personally coaching really helps with that. Um, Also, like setting up those practices ahead of time is going to be really important. So it's not going to all happen at once. You're not going to be able to like not feel overwhelmed overnight, but it's a gradual process. So kind of dealing with what you can in the short term, deprioritizing the things that aren't urgent. Over time, hopefully you can build that up. The one big thing people ask me, they asked me after the London's Calling talk, actually, people were like, okay, we've talked about burnout. I know the signs for burnout now. I can recognize them. But what if I do? What do I do if it's already happened? What if I'm already burnt out? And I think that's kind of very similar to feeling overwhelmed. I would say the best thing you can do then really is to take a break, to pause. Um, it's difficult to hear. A lot of people, especially leaders, don't like to hear this. Um, and when you're running at 100 miles per hour, it can be really difficult for somebody to just be like, stop. And it's probably the last thing you want to hear. But ultimately, if you're already at the point where you're overwhelmed and burnt out, the best thing you can do is take a break. And that again is something that you can think about and maybe look for help with. But whether that's like a day, whether it's a week, whatever it is, to take that time to reset and go, I need to actually just like switch off, pause, rest, and then come back at this. You may well feel that just taking that pause already helps and you're able to approach things with a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah, completely. Agree with what you've shared, because you've shared some really good points about um, within leadership roles. A lot of time we just feel like, okay, everything is our responsibility, and so if we are taking a break, team will think about, okay, we should do that as well, and so we feel like, okay, whatever is happening, we have to show up and we have to get things done, and we can't take a break. But it sometimes again gets way too overwhelming as a human, whether you're a leader or you're um, a normal employee. Everyone needs a break, so it's totally
Mm,
fine, it's normal. It's not like your team doesn't understand that you need a break. You just have to think
exactly.
about yourself sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And it sets a good precedent, I think, to let people know that if they need a break, they can take it too, right? I think you made a
Mhm.
good point. Whether you're a leader or not, you're all human. And we're colleagues, we're peers, we respect each other. So um, go back to my earlier point from the beginning session, we're not going to be able to control what other people think of us. But ultimately, if you are overwhelmed, you're more likely to be making mistakes. You're more likely to come across flustered or panicked. That is going to have an impact on other people that are working with you. So the priority really is to reset and calm yourself, but also that will have a benefit to those who are working with you as well if you're in a more rested state of mind.
Mhm. Yeah, completely agree with you on this. All right, moving on to the next question. So, next question is from Kritika. She wants to know, networking is essential in our field, but it can also be stressful. So, how can we build meaningful professional relationships without feeling pressured?
I like this question. I think about this a lot with running a user group because it's a lot, right? You're always talking to people, you're always trying to make sure everyone's happy and fed and the talks are interesting. I'm sure you feel the same running these sessions as well. So it can be quite stressful. I think for me personally, the way I find it to be meaningful is again, I kind of do what I enjoy. So I'm not going to go to the events where I don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to go to the events where I know I'm going to be exhausted, or, maybe if there are five events in a day and I'm like, okay, I can't do all of these five. I'm only going to pick one, things like that. There is so going on in the Salesforce ecosystem. There will be 101 things to do at any given time. So picking the ones you enjoy, the ones that work for you. Maybe today I'm not feeling so good. I'm going to do the virtual one. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to listen into the session. Next time when I'm feeling a bit more energized and ready to speak to people face to face, I'm going to go to the face to face event. There are so many different options that you can really pick and choose, find what works for you. Um, in terms of like building the meaningful professional relationships, again, do what works for you. Don't feel obliged to speak to 100 people on LinkedIn every single morning. It can be a lot. It can be really overwhelming. Focus on what works for you. Maybe it's more meaningful for you to have that 1 hour chat with somebody one to one than it is to go to a networking event for half a day and speak to 100 people. So again, adapt to what works for you and just be kind to yourself. I think it can be very easy to compare and say, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, but do what works for you. There's no should in this. It's just what you can do, what works for you.
Yes, a very, very good point. And something which I want to add to this is I actually was recently listening to one of the social influencers. I guess it was Simon Sinek. And so he mentioned, there are two types of people. Everyone is aware of that: introverts and extroverts. Introverts are people, in our mind, introverts are people who don't talk to other folks outside of, their group. Uh, and the extroverts are people who love to talk to everyone, but that's not the case in reality, because introverts are the people who actually have a certain amount of energy, and if, like, when they're talking to people, that energy gets drained, and by the end of the day they don't have any social energy left. Whereas extroverts are the people who doesn't have anything in that bucket, but when they talk to people, that level just goes up and up and up, and so they enjoy talking to people. But that's why they're introverts. So it's not like, sorry, that's why they're extroverts. So it's not like introverts can't have a conversation or build network. It's just that if you're an introvert, you have that limited set of energy, and so you don't want to feel stressful or overwhelmed while connecting with people. Whereas when you're an extrovert, you just love connecting with people because that gives you all that energy back, and you feel more energized and you want to connect with more people, and it's like a like different cycle for them. So if you're asking this question, that means you fall into that first category of introverts. And since you are into that category, I would recommend think about, okay, this is something which I can deal with without feeling overwhelmed, and just do that. Like, if it's not
Mm,
working out for you, you don't necessarily have to feel pressured to do that.
I think so. I 100% agree. I like to think of like my social battery. Everyone's kind of got like a social battery, and you might be in the red zone, you might be in the green zone, you might be fully charged, whatever. So just think about that going in, right? I like to make sure, like I talked about, blocking out my calendar so that I could, really have the energy because it's difficult when you go to an event and you feel really drained. You don't feel like you've got the motivation to talk to people. That's not that's I would like to not have that when I'm going. I like to be like really energized and pumped and ready to talk to people. So yeah, just be mindful of your battery and find the thing recharge to make sure that you can do that when you are engaging with other people.
Absolutely agree with this. All right, so time's almost up, but we do have two more questions. Do you think we can manage one more in, or?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm happy.
cool.
I'm happy. Even two's fine
Uh,
for me.
all right, so I guess we have touched like briefly on both of these questions already, but I will just take this one for the time being. It's from Dikshant, and he wants to know how can we communicate our boundaries effectively to our managers and colleagues without appearing less committed to our work. So I guess we discussed a lot of things on this already. But if you have any additional points, we can talk about it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, we've talked about it a little bit. Just to summarize, I would say make sure you're communicating often and in good time to your managers. So it can appear less committed if you're saying this at the last minute when everything's already hit the wall and they really need you. If you're telling them then that you've got a boundary, it's probably too late and it is going to come across a bit difficult. It's not fair on the other person either. So yeah, just communicate it within good time. If it's your manager and a colleague that you're speaking to regularly, try and tell them ahead of time and be very clear about it if things change.
Completely agree with you on this. All right. With that said, we will wrap the session for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful questions and for joining us today. And Safia, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our today's session of Trailblazer Talks. Your insights were really valuable, and I was able to learn a lot of things from you as well today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invite. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, before we wrap up today's session, I just want to mention that our next session, Eric Drashfield will be joining us. Eric obviously needs no introduction. He's the MVP Hall of Famer, and he was the first person to ever organize a dreaming event anywhere in the world. So we'll be discussing some really interesting things for new trailblazers or people who are joining in the Salesforce ecosystem. To leverage communities for the betterment of their career or even to land a job. So you don't want to miss this session. So stay tuned. I will be posting about it very soon, potentially this week or early next week. Until that time, thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the week. See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks. Bye.
All right.